Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Josh Geddes, and I work for the Diverse Learners Cooperative. And our focus for today is sustainable differentiation for the general education classroom. And we're going to really take that and narrow it down even further into specifically how do we do this? How do we plan for a student named Alex who really struggles to focus and complete work independently in the classroom? So our question is, how are we going to overcome the challenge of planning for diverse learners, specifically the student named Alex? Like, how are we going to get him to meet the learning goal to achieve grade level mastery? We know this is can be a really significant challenge, and so we compared it to climbing a mountain, and so you'll see that theme throughout today. So, as you know, classrooms are filled with many students with many different needs, proficiency levels, and we hear all too often that teachers are being asked to plan to meet the needs of all of them, and it can feel overwhelming. When do I have time for that? But I'm not going to ask you to plan for all the learners in the classroom. Instead, I'm going to ask you to plan for just one diverse learner and then get really great at applying those learnings for the benefit of the majority of your students. So our focus here is level 2. And at level 2, we're planning for students with similar needs. And then we're going to take those learnings and apply it to level 1. So we're planning for level 2 for the benefit of level 1 or tier 1. So the strategy is called the focal student strategy. And by focusing on focal students, we believe teachers become more effective for all students. And so there's actual ripple effect, if you will. So you can see the diagram here that the narrative is, once I learn how to accelerate the learning of these students in key skill areas, I can use these approaches for bigger groups of students. And if I use my focal students and my knowledge of what helps them progress to inform my whole class planning, that planning will be more personalized and will impact students who have similar needs. And what I think is important about this strategy, just to point out, it's not only important for teachers to examine the focal students' academic needs, but also to really think of what are their affective or emotional needs. Think of that whole child. So when we're walking through the strategy, it's not just about the academics, but also the rest of the student. So does it work? Well, there's some evidence from a school in California called Oak Grove School District. And so the ripple effect is indeed happening, that teachers who accelerated 3 or more focal students by 1 to 2 levels on the California Standards Test also accelerated more students overall while allowing fewer students to drop proficiency levels. So we know it works if it's done well. So what we have done, the Diverse Learner Cooperative, is develop 4 learner profiles. And essentially, we're asking teachers to get great at planning for 4 students with similar needs, so similar profiles, with the idea that if we get great at these 4, our tier 1, our grade level instruction is going to look very different and meaningfully improve the learning of majority of students in the class. But we're going to get great at planning for 1 student at a time. And so today we're actually focusing on Alex, who struggles to maintain focus and complete work independently. Hopefully you have a student that fits that profile in your class. So here's the process. It's a full focal student strategy. So starting with 1 student like Alex, you plan lessons with him in mind over the course of 1 month, let's say. Could be a different time period. You work this process many times, get great at a few tier 1 scaffold strategies before we move on to another focal student. And the steps in the process are: 1, starting with the learning goal, so you'll know where you're heading. 2, get to know the student really well, both academic and affective needs. And then we can actually get to the barrier in a really strategic way. So what are the barriers this student will have on this specific learning goal? We then come up with some scaffolds that are going to help the student overcome those barriers, play it out in class, see what the impact is. So evaluate that student work, take learnings from that, and repeat the process multiple times. So you can imagine you might have your lesson template out or a unit plan. You would have our focal planning template, just as a one-pager. And then we've got a learner profile with a bunch of scaffold ideas, scaffolds, strategies that support students with this profile. So those is what I would have out if I was implementing this strategy. So we start with the learning goal. I know we have most likely all written learning goals, but I think just want to point out that it's really clear to make sure we can visualize what the finish line looks like, and almost applying a stranger test. Could someone who really doesn't know the content very well come in, read the learning goal, and then sort of narrate what success would look like? Just something to think about as you write your learning goals. So here's an example. Science is a science learning goal. So using both a visual aid, so like a labeled Venn diagram, and multi-paragraph written explanation, the student would compare and contrast the rates of cell division in various eukaryotic cell types in multicellular organisms. So this is a learning goal. So now we know where we're going. We're actually at the end of this unit going to be asking Alex to create this visual aid and label it, and then write multiple paragraphs comparing and contrasting the rates of cell division. So I want to add that to the template. Now the next step is, we know where we're going. Now we need to know our travelers. Like, what about them will influence the path that we take? So you would actually go in and second part of the plan, or add the actual student narrative. And here's Alex's. For example, note that we have both interest and motivation and student strengths before we even talk about the barriers to learning and their struggles with learning. So starting with the asset mindset and strengths of the student. But Alex specifically has many friends, enjoys activities that are active like PE, plays the guitar, so likes music, and it can be found reading graphic novels. His reading, their student strengths, his reading skills are only about a year behind grade level. However, he is frequently off task during class and struggles to complete work independently, like struggles with multi-step directions, putting the thoughts down and writing and other things like that. So when we know we're heading and we know our student, we also begin to understand what might get in their way. So we're able to name those specific barriers. So thinking about the specific learning goal for Alex, what barrier might he face? Well, one, he might lack interest in the topic. He's not sure how to get started on the visual aid. He's not really familiar with it. Maybe he's could struggle organizing his thoughts in writing. So he could maybe orally tell you, but really struggles putting it in writing. And poor executive functioning skills. So during independent time, like managing, did he stay in focus? Is he using the time well, for example? It could be a real challenge for him. So you would add those to the template and then move on to the next step in the process. So it's just assemble the tools. Specifically, what pathways will we need to prepare for? What equipment or supplies will we need to ensure that Alex can make it all the way to the top, if you will, and meet the grade level learning goal? So we're going to need to come up with some specific strategies, or we call it tools, but they're what we call scaffolds. And scaffolds are temporary. They're a bridge to students accessing rigorous content. They're tailored to the specific barrier, and they're done first. So we know if we implement really strategic scaffolds, that a lot of the students who need accommodations and modifications in the room will also benefit from these. So we do these first. So just to recap, we're planning at level 2 for the benefit of level 1, supplying those learnings to the majority of the students. So now what you would do is actually for each sort of category, come up with a scaffold. You could do, one for each. You could do 2 in the area of representation. Bottom line is you're just tailoring the scaffolds to the specific barriers. So the first bucket or category there is engagement. And it says, what is necessary for the student to feel purposeful and motivated? The second one here is representation. So like, what am I going to need to do as a teacher to present this content in a way that's accessible? And action and expression. Like, how will the student work strategically to accomplish the goal? What will the student need to show what they know? So here's some examples. So this is, again, in the category of engagement. We know that flexible seating can work really well for students who struggle to focus because movement increases focus. So here's a classroom, and actually each table has a different type of seating. We tend to see this more elementary, but it's actually great as well for secondary students. And there's even an article linked in here titled "A 7th Grade Teacher's Shift to Flexible Learning." So it's a firsthand account of the impact this had on her classroom. Here's some more examples: the wobble stools, seat cushions, bouncy, or I call them bouncy balls or yoga ball. And great for pre-K through second, let's say carpet time. These are called cube chairs. They're fantastic for carpet time, keep students focused. So the next one is engagement. Another example, I guess, of a scaffold is really breaking whether the reading or direct instruction into small chunks and then giving students time to process in between. So it could be a stop and jot or a turn and talk, but chunking my instruction or reading, giving students time to process in between each chunk. Another example, another category is representation, and this is a show and tell. So specifically modeling the use of the graphic organizer and explaining my thinking while I do that is really going to help students who are unfamiliar with how to do this to stay focused and engaged and be able to understand what I'm asking of them. So the last category is action and expression. So in this case, what will a student need in order to show what they know? So imagine there's independent work time. And so this is particular ones in math, but like it's a read, draw, write template, and it is linked in here. So you could just click on that link and go to it. So here, excuse me. So we're looking at the read, draw, write template. So this would help a student during independent time solve word problems and know what each step they need to do to break it down independently. This other is a link to just really great options for students to struggle with writing. If you had an area station where students who struggle with handwriting could write on the laptop, there's some great tools to assist with that. Here is, it's called Classroom Screen. So you can imagine during independent time, there's just all these tools that help manage the classroom and manage students' time during independent time. So for example, it has a timer, it has a sound sort of meter, if you will. It monitors the level of sound. You can give clarity on what your expectations are. Can students whisper? You can change it to silent, for example. And if you see students making common mistakes, you can narrate it. Both narrate your directions again and write them out. So it's called classroomscreen.com. And most importantly, at the end, you would look at the student work and ask yourself the questions found in that template, like, did they meet the measure of success? How so? And then take those learnings and then repeat the process. So quick tips as we wrap up here. Ask yourself, did you identify a focal student that could serve as a proxy for other students with similar needs? So you would pick a student that isn't so much an outlier that there's no other students in the class like him or her. You would actually pick a student that can be a proxy. There are other students in the room with similar needs. And then where your scaffolds tailored to the specific barriers for that learning goal. So just questions considered as you implement this process. To level up, consider doing it multiple times to get really good at it before you move on to the next focal student. And we believe we learn better together or learn faster together. So doing it alongside a colleague is also a great idea. So if you haven't seen this cartoon, it's wonderful. But we believe when we build a pathway for diverse learners, all students come in. So if you have any questions, reach out to me. My name is Josh at Diverse, or my email is josh@diverselearnerscoop.com. And I'd love to have your questions, answer any questions that you might have. Well, thanks for joining us today, and I hope to see you again soon.